Hey, what's up guys, this is Oakley and a huge amount of information has dropped. We can now share it with you all. I'm going to be going through a whole bunch of points, breaking it down, making sure I gave you all the information that I was able to cover. And this is all stemming from the reveal of the subterranean quest battle, Ambush at the Thundering Falls. So a very cool battle. I'll be breaking this down into multiple parts. We're going to be taking a look at the battle type, the units, the UI, the battle mechanics, and then finally my impressions and miscellaneous items that I picked up on. This is all coming from an event that we had with CA, where we got to get hands-on gameplay with this particular scenario, played it multiple times. The developers were next to us, we could ask questions and stuff like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So we're going to start here with the battle type. This is going to be, as it says, a subterranean quest battle. So we'll tackle this in two parts. First, the quest battle is something that happens on the campaign map that's been mentioned before, where you progress your hero level by level, and you, as your hero or legendary character gets to a certain stage, then you unlock a quest battle, and you can go ahead and click to do that quest battle. It's built into the campaign experience. You can do it whenever you want. When you go into that quest battle, you can bring your own particular army to try and beat that quest battle. Once you do beat that quest battle, then you unlock, the next tier of abilities and stuff like that. Now, we got into this battle in its own isolation, so we didn't have that whole campaign map progression. We just played the battle itself with no context, with a standard set of units. Let's go over the second part. So, subterranean quest battle. Let's talk about the subterranean part. This is something that has been teased over and over again. We never really were sure if they're going to do underground battles. This is all but confirmed, obviously. So, the underground setting itself, I'm going to paint the scenes for you here. We deploy our forces in a huge cave. It's not a small cave by any stretch of the imagination. Massive cave. It's clearly a cave. I mean, you can see walls all around you. There's actually, like the name implies, Thundering Falls. There's waterfalls coming down on the right side of the deployment battlefield, coming from like holes in the ceiling, dropping down, and then it goes down into a black nether. But the cave itself is very big, very sprawling. There's decent illumination, so no problem in that. The ceiling is relatively high, so your camera doesn't get clipped at all. And it's actually very, very spacious in terms of an underground battle. So I thought they handled it very well. The artwork is beautiful. They have bits and pieces of broken dwarf statues here and there. The ground isn't just, flat grass or flat dirt. It has, broken roads and cracks, dead bodies, stuff like that sprinkled around. The art team has done a fantastic job tackling this. You also see interspersed around this underground area, there's going to be these orc encampments built into the side of the walls, little huts, barricades, weapons, and fortifications built into the walls. Just lots of really cool, nice, fine detail artwork built into it. And you can really tell that the art team has their handcuffs pulled off for this Warhammer Total War, and they're just going to town on the artwork. So the whole theme for this underground battle was truly beautiful. Let's go over what type of battle this is. So they said a quest battle, but more specifically it's an ambush battle. So they did confirm that you're going to be able to have these types of ambush battles underground. So just like in Attila you have, and Rome and other previous Total War games, you could have ambush battles. Now the way they handled this previously is you would lose control of your army, and that army would be forced to march in column until the enemy army that was ambushing you attacked. And then all of a sudden you'd be given control of your units. It didn't quite work this way. The battle itself was an ambush just in the sense that you could deploy your forces within a deployment zone, but then the enemy had the chance to set up their deployments on various sides. So they could set up, an opposite deployment zone facing you off in the distance, and then there were two on the flanks, one on the right, one on the left, and then one in the back. So you can attack from four sides as the ambush player. And what was interesting is the main one that was opposite you was kind of like a typical deployment zone, big, fat square where you can deploy forces. Now the ones on the sides and the rear were interesting. They were coming out of sort of cave tunnels, or sort of pre-built tunnels that were essentially black. So you couldn't see past them. There was like a gate, and then basically units would spew out of there. So that made me think, I was wondering how this would work, because like I said, in previous ambush battles, you would have everything deployed at once, but in this particular quest battle, it was a staggered deployment of forces. So at first, units would come out of the ambush on the right, then they would come out on the left, then they would come out on the back. And I'm wondering if that is part of the functionality of typical ambush battles. If you can choose when you're going to stagger your assault and when to send in units, I think that would be cool. Or it could just be a mechanic of the quest battle itself being timed by the AI. So I didn't get to pick out the details of that, but that's kind of what that's leading to the impression here. On top of these underground ambush battles, like I said, you deploy your own forces. Both sides have their deployment zones. There weren't any additional deployment objects that you could put. So, for example, in previous Total War games, you could put down stakes, stone beds, spike traps, fireballs. I didn't see any of that. And so I asked CA if they're going to be deployables. They're a little bit squirmish about answering questions like that. And so far, it seemed to be that the answer was no, and I don't know if they've considered it or if it's going to be implemented in the future. I'm just telling you what I've seen and found so far. Now, we're underground, and like we said, this is a quest battle, and it's an ambush type of quest battle. So, presumably it was confirmed that there will be underground ambush battles. Now, on top of that, probably we'll have regular underground battles, where you have two deployment zones facing each other, again, in this underground setting. Now, CA has also confirmed that there are actually going to be underground sieges. Now, we've seen this before in videos, but it was never officially confirmed, and we didn't quite know the mechanic behind it. So I'm reading a document right here that says, Dwarven cities, or Karaks, are situated beneath mountains. Sieges against Karaks will always occur in underground city maps. So that confirms it, ladies and gentlemen. We have underground sieges. And something people are wondering, are Karaks going to be above ground? Because most of the time there's a dwarf fortified entrance above ground, sort of the main entrance to the underground areas, and you have to fight it up there before you can even get underground. It looks like they're kind of foregoing that, and you will have to fight these battles in an underground setting. That's where the front gate is going to be. Maybe not perfectly tuned into the lore, but still nonetheless, it's going to be very epic, and you're definitely going to feel like you're in the Dwarven world of things. So, that's what I'm going to do for the first part, which is covering the battle type. Let's move on to the second part, which is going to be the units. Now, in this battle, we were going to be doing a defense in an ambush playing as the dwarfs, and then the greenskins were attacking us. So let's dive right into the greenskins unit roster confirmed for this battle. On foot, they're going to be having the goblin spearmen and goblin archers. Then mounted, they're going to have forest goblin spider riders, goblin wolf riders with spears, and then the orc boar boy big guns. In terms of monsters, they're going to have trolls, giants, and an arachnarok spider. In terms of equipment, it's going to be a goblin doom diver catapult. And in terms of the heroes, they have a goblin great shaman on wolf. And then they have knobnails backbiter, goblin great shaman on giant wolf. So that's awesome. You can see the variety already with these guys, various mounted units, various monsters, the various heroes and all that. Let's go ahead and look at the dwarfs. The dwarfs are perhaps a bit more compact in the sense that they don't necessarily have mounted units, but let's dive in nonetheless. So what do they have on foot? Well, basically everything's on foot, but in melee, I should say. They have the dwarf warriors, longbeards with great weapons, and slayers. Then as we move into, the ranged footmen, we have quarrelers, so those guys have crossbows, thunderers, who are black powder rifles, and then iron drakes. Moving on to equipment, you have the organ gun, the flame cannon, and the gyrocopter. In terms of heroes, we have High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer on his throne of power. And then we have a dwarf thane called Valar Mineward. So there you go, confirming that there's a huge variety of units on the battlefield itself. I want to talk a bit about how these were detailed. So, of course, first off, they were beautiful. They were awesome. Let's go ahead and talk about the melee infantry. So the way they seem to stagger this as you go from warriors all the way up to slayers and more elite units is they change the numbers and the size of your unit. So that is something we worried about before in previous speculation, is how are they going to balance, the dwarf warriors who are all elite units? How are you going to balance that out? And it seems like they decide to do, a gradient where the cheapest and the weakest of the dwarf units is going to be larger in number. I think it was about 120 or 140 men. And then the most expensive and elite are going to be smaller in number, so down to maybe 80 men. So that's what they did when it went from warriors, longbeards, down to hammerers. So you get more and more elite units, but more, smaller and smaller numbers. And I think that's a good way to sort of handle that type of problem. Now, there were also the Slayers. They were in a slightly larger unit. I think they had 80 men. The spacing for most of these dwarf units was tight and compact, so almost as if they were in shield wall. And then the Slayers, however, were, because of the lore, where they fight, without fearing death. They want to seek out death. They want to take on enemy champions and heroes and giants and monsters. These guys were spaced in a more staggered formation. It's more spread out, kind of loose formation. Let's go on to the ranged units, the Quarrelers, Thunderers, and Iron Drakes. I think the Quarrelers and Thunderers were of equal size. So I think if I had to put a number on it, it was around like 100, 120 men, something like that. These guys look cool. The range on them wasn't huge. If you compare it to Attila, where you have, Gothic archers who can shoot at 200 range, it seemed to be much, much shorter than that, which I'm glad because, again, in previous speculation, we talked about how the dwarf range units are very, very skilled and they could pose a problem at range. So it seems like they've drawn back the range on these guys and made sure that the dwarves are very good at close quarters combat, but can't really hit you that effectively from far away. So the Quarrelers, still pretty strong, heavily armored. We got them into combat a little bit. They could tank it out. And the Quarrelers, the crossbows, shot them out. And they weren't doing super amounts of damage, but I heard that they were good at armor penetration. Same with the Thunderers, so those guys getting volleys off. Now, in terms of the volley from the Thunderer, it wasn't anything like Napoleon, or it wasn't even like Matchlocks. It was a little bit slower and weaker than that. Think of maybe the gun-type units that you saw in Medieval 2. I would think of it more in that sense. It wasn't like huge cutting swaths into opponents, but it was pretty, substantive fire that could take out high-value units, punch through armor, but it wasn't anything that would wipe out units in seconds. So I thought that was cool. Then the highest tier one that we saw in terms of range was the Iron Drakes. The Iron Drakes are few in number. I think there was about 20 or 30 of these guys. Super heavily armored. These guys from the lore lug around these giant kind of like hand cannons. And the way these guys works in the game is they actually fire out flaming shots. So if you've ever seen Attila, the flame ships, where they sort of spew out fire, it almost looked exactly like that, where you shoot out these fire blasts. They arc almost like a big flamethrower. It lands, it does area effect, and then it burns down units to a crispy little morsels. So that's the Iron Drakes for you. Again, kind of limited range, but super effective once they get within range. That's those guys. Let's move on to the equipment. So you had the cannons, the organ guns, and the flame cannons. All of these guys, again, being very, very good in the lore, but it seems like CA tapered them down by reducing the effective artillery range of the cannons. I tried pressing insert on all of these cannons. So, for example, the cannons right there didn't have any ox carts or anything like that. So they were kind of deployed stationary. I think you can pick them up and move. But anyways, they have, I think, 2 or 3 guns per unit. And if you press insert, you can actually continue to do the manual firing like we saw with artillery pieces in Rome and Attila. So you press insert, and then you see a little red arching target, and then you can shoot. So that functionality is still there. The cannon is there. The organ gun is there. The flame cannon was there. That again kind of shoots similar to the Iron Drakes. The batteries of the flame cannons, very, very effective. And then finally the last piece of equipment was the gyrocopters. These came into effect later in the battlefield. And what these guys do is they come in groups of, I think, 4 gyrocopters. They fly around. They have a little cannon in front of them. That doesn't, again, do too much damage, but it's good for like harassing fire. And what you can do is these guys have 2 bomb salvos with them, and that is an active ability. So you fly over various units, and then you click the drop bombs ability, and each of the 4 gyrocopters will drop a bomb. It doesn't do too much damage. I would say it's kind of like a NAFTA hurler in Rome 2. So a little area effect. What you can do is you can double click those bombs. So if you find a nice cluster of troops, position yourself above, click the bomb button twice. With 4 units, that's 8 bombs, and you can just destroy, with that combined fire, units like that. So I thought it was a very interesting unit. They zip around very quickly. Didn't get to see if they had fatigue or fuel or anything like that or ammo on them. But they seem super effective. For this build, I will mention that most of the units we're dealing with at range had a lot of ammo, and I'm not sure if that was finalized. I think it was just for the sake of this quest battle to make sure, all our units were continuously firing. I'm sure they'll bounce that in the future. Now, the next type of unit I want to talk about is the heroes. We had some sort of dwarf lord, and then we had Thorgrim Grudgebearer. These are single entity units. Well, maybe not. The dwarf lord was. So he was running around, has area effect, has special armor, he has a lot of health, he's very tanky, he can get into combat, and he has some special abilities. Then Thorgrim Grudgebearer actually is going to be seated on his high throne with the Book of Grudges. He's carried by 4 dwarfs on each corner, and he can actually sort of attack from on top of his chair. He doesn't necessarily get into a match combat animation, but he kind of swings with his hammer, kind of leans down from his chair and swings about, whereas his carriers kind of run around with this chair. It looks super goofy, but it's pretty cool. So yeah, he can do his damage. So that's what we saw from the dwarf units. I don't want to get into too much details about the orcs or the greenskins. So yeah, I want to talk about, when we talk about this roster, I want to talk about the strength and weaknesses. And this is going to sort of tie into one of my points coming up later. But yeah, so this dwarf roster, what you saw is you have all types of different units, and they tried to balance these out by making sure that the cheap units, the low tier units, have a lot of guys, whereas the elite guys have less. But it's not just that. These are also differentiated in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. So each particular unit has its own nice summary. If you click on a unit and you look at its description, it has 3 summarizing points about it. So for example, if you were to click on the Slayers, it might say, these guys are unbreakable, they're quick for a dwarf, and they excel against like giants or monsters. And so you have each of these units with a special ability that it's used for. And I thought that was really cool. And so what that means is, because the army composition is so different in terms of, okay, we're facing the goblins, so they're going to have, weak goblins, they're going to have giant trolls, they're going to have armored arachnids. You're going to have to pick and choose which unit to use in which situation, which I think helps counter the fact that on the tabletop you could get away with just having one type of, dwarf quarreler army. Whereas here it seems like they've made sure that each particular unit has its own abilities, excels in one type of combat, but you have to have, a good composition in order to deal with the variety of enemy threats. So Longbeards, Hammerers might be good at, tanking out grinding fights, but you want to use a Slayer to take out some giant beast that's coming in at you, or maybe you want to use Quarrelers or Thunderers to penetrate high armor enemy units. So everything was summarized in a nice quick 3 bullet point thing about where they excel, what they're good at, what to use them for, and everything has its own unique situation that it's best used in. And I thought that was very refreshing. That's one of the things that stuck out to me. So I think we've gone over most of the units. And I'm going to talk about now the UI, kind of a nice segue. So talking about the units, let's talk about the UI. So the unit cards at the bottom are very nicely painted. They didn't do the Rome 2 one where it's kind of like art style. What they decided to do is take your units and kind of take the unit card, more like what we see in Attila, and then they kind of color coded it and made some nice artwork around it. So I thought it was very nice. You could definitely pick out what was what. You could see the unit itself. It was very clear. As for the UI, the unit flags are still up there. They were flags. Very evident what unit was what. You could see on top of the unit, just at a glance, what type of unit they were, and that'll help out on the battlefield. And also what I thought was really cool is if you hold down spacebar, and this might be, they might change the short key, but if you hold down spacebar for now, you can customize your UI on the fly. So there's, you hold down spacebar, and then there's there's like 10 or so checkboxes that come up on the right, and you can check or uncheck various things. So maybe you want to turn off unit flags, or you want to turn off projectiles, or you want to turn off waypoints. You can customize on the fly the way your UI looks, and I thought that was an awesome thing. I don't know why they didn't implement that sooner, but that was a really cool functionality. As for the rest of the UI, it's pretty similar to what we've seen. Unit bar at the bottom. If you click on a unit, you have the stats that pop up on the left. Like I said before, they say the top 3 things about that unit. They then simplified what that unit is good at. And then also there is still the tactical map. Now when we played the battle, it wasn't active, so I don't know how to commentate on that. They said they would add it in the future. I don't know if they're adding anything new to the tactical map, but they have confirmed that it is still in existence. So anyways, that's going to be wrapping it up for this video. Like I said, we've gone through the first 3 points, the battle type, the units, and the UI. Join me for the second video where we go over the battle mechanics and I try and walk you through the changes and I talk more about my impressions. Anyways, I've been rambling on long enough for this one. Stay tuned for the next video. I'll see you guys. Peace out.